I call that my hill. Now, for 8 years, that's been an important part of my life. Walking along there and up the hill. So I did a part 2 where I said that there's something fundamental to try and get over. Now, I haven't quite got it, but now I spent the night in my little van here, pulled off this road, which I happen to know has 3 cars a day come up it. Literally, paradise. In other words, I am almost existing in my own completely separate little bubble. Now, oh god, this is cheesy, but let me try and roll it out quickly. And I shall turn that off because it's noisy, but it's kind of part of it. Now, it might look like a bit of a mess, but first things first, you have to have in mind who the film is for. Well, I know exactly who it's for. Now, I have a book here. This is a magnificent journalistic book. Within that is a few notes, specifically for the last few months. I've been writing some emails to somebody who I met 4.5 years ago, blah blah blah. She ignored me a few years, and this isn't intrusive. Her spirit is magnificent. Now, I don't really know exactly what her moral, ethical settings are, but she put on Facebook a link to Nomadland. Now, as I said, I think I said, I've said it to her. I've written to her, and she hasn't blocked me or argued. But it's not an argument. It's not a very life-affirming movie. Let's start at the beginning. So I'm very, very aware that in my 20s, I'm somebody who would go out and look for deep, meaningful culture. Now, it was a bit easier in the 80s and 90s. Right, that's the charger. My centre of my life. And keeping this thing going, literally, is what it's all about. Having simplified, because that's the thing. No matter what, you simplify down. Such that, I mean, it's Sunday morning. I've been up since dawn. And when you're in a little live-in vehicle, you spend, well, you don't have to, but I do. You spend the first hour getting organised, getting things in place so you're ergonomic and efficient. Now, don't worry, there's a point to this. This tray here, I mean, you obviously want as little as possible because there isn't much room. Every single thing in here, I can say where every single thing. My toothbrush is in there. My earplugs, if I happen to be parked somewhere where it's a bit noisy. In the next pouch, I have I have my headphones, if I want to listen to something, and I have an ergonomic little pouch of essential electrical digital connections in there. I have my map, Right. This is my tray of to-do list. That's the things that I'd like to do today. Included in here Not that I'm going to be making much in the way of films of myself, because I don't really think it's a particularly inspiring medium to do. The only luxury I've bought for many years is that, which is a microphone that plugs into a smartphone. One of these transmitter microphone things, Asden Pro, right? But I never got it working properly, right? So it's in the to-do tray. Today, maybe I'll get to that. And then, I want to write a few things to a few specific people. Oh, and more importantly, everything electronic. I mean, this actually isn't about the film, but in a way it is. Right? Everything electronic. And I'm not a fool. I know what are reasonable brands. Logitech. That's not that old. And the keyboards. The lettering on the keyboard has faded already. And unfortunately, the one thing that I never learnt in life is to touch type. So I bought a second one, but that's got a key missing. Now maybe I can take the key off that one and put it on that one. Not as easy as it looks, and I'm not daft. Much more importantly, these days, although this wasn't the case in mid-00s, everything has an intermittent fault. When I turn on my little power source thing there, sometimes it charges, sometimes it doesn't. There is no understanding. It's literally like every other time. Right, now that's silly waffle. Let's get to a point. Right, in the 80s and 90s, and there really is something to say, and really in the 80s and 90s. Now, first of all, a film about a heterosexual person and a child. Now, I'm fully aware that this is not, it's not a very good thing to say when you're talking about getting a film made, but 3 or 4 years ago, I discovered the Pirate Station's Putlocker, and the latest one is Vumo.to. I haven't paid to watch film for years, although in the 2000s, no television, but with my daughter, I did take out a Love Film subscription. I think they became Netflix. Anyway, and once a week, maybe a couple of times a week, we'd have a DVD at home. Always looking for something meaningful, inspiring. So in my 20s, you knew there were occasionally films that had a certain factor in them. Now, one of them was Killing Fields. I spent a lot of time based in London, so you had your sort of experimental, avant-garde, art house film area. It's kind of 3 types of films. And frankly, not... Now I always wanted to find great film in that world. Oh, I knew there was something beeping. Right. I always wanted to find great film that made you walk out of the cinema and want to do something next. Now, I didn't find much. And I am fully aware that this experimental avant-garde world has massively expanded. Then you have your ordinary mass market, Bruce Willis, whatever thing. And then you have those few special films. Now, I'm not a cynic, and it's about having one of those special films. And they blindsided you often. I mean, The Killing Fields too. It's films. It's about films that change you, and you can't enforce that. You can't package that. It's the luck of the draw, I guess, whether or not you find the special factor. I mean, The Killing Fields. I went to see The Killing Fields thinking, oh God, right, not interested in Cambodia, not interested in American journalists. But within that film, not with now, by the way. Rubbish film, with now. Within that film, I learnt to admire a little brown man. And I walked out of that cinema thinking, my life's changed. I will no longer, not that I had prejudice, but I will no longer not think of little brown men. And then the best example of that this century, now and again, I'll look up The Guardian. What are the good films? And I have to say that a lot of what they put in there is confected. It's there to make a point. We are supporting certain kinds of narratives and ways of looking at life. Now, I'll never forget this. About 10 years ago, I think it was about 10 years ago, like on number 3 with a picture was the film Samson and Delilah, with an Aboriginal man and Australian Aboriginal, and I think it was the couple. And I left that till last. I wrote an essay at the time online about how it showed my innate prejudice, because we all have them. That's the point. I left that till last. I watched half a dozen others, maybe more, over the course of a few months. My relaxation, but curiosity about the culture, society, what's being said, what films are being made, what messages are being promoted, what are people trying to share. And that was a life-changing film. It was just magnificent, just gorgeous, humanizing and making us love, relate to, glue-sniffing, lost, Aboriginal, total tramp class. I just changed my life. Now, I also, at the end of the day, you see, I think there's a problem with Britain. Now, I can't do anything about that with a film, but in my teens, we had a few films that really did impact big time. Now, Walkabout. That was so shocking, but gorgeous. Not shocking, a white girl being with an Aboriginal. No, what happened to the Aboriginal man at the end? And I'm not fixated on Aboriginal people, but that was just a magnificent film that was so shocking, the end phase of the film, that it hopefully did make people think. But I'm actually going to talk about today. Now, for the last 3 or 4 years, various things, particularly from Brexit, it's like, oh God, talking with people, speaking with people. What is there to say about our society? Blah, blah, blah. And my way of shutting down, but it's always a bit of a quest, is to, a few times a week, put a movie on. All right? Stolen. Copyright. Thief. And I reached a point a couple of months ago, I don't even want to think anymore. This is as the winter of the pandemic is going on. I thought, oh, why not look at the James Bond? I haven't seen a James Bond film for 10 years. I avoid that kind of thing. I have seen them. I've seen most of them, as along with most of the population. Now, let me just go back to something. Right. So, 7 or 8 years ago, having had an internet connection at home, I started to think, right, okay, I'm interested. What are the more less Philistine cultural guides? I mean, we used to have Time Out, which was very reliable in the 80s and 90s as a guide to what is good, what matters. So looking up The Guardian, etc., time and time again, you'd see they would be referring to The Sopranos. So 4 or 5 years ago, I thought, okay, it's time to see what they're going on about. And I'd heard Radio 4 programs, art show programs, lauding this, celebrating it as some great new development. This is 10 or 15 years ago, of course, in thoughtful television. Sorry. No. I get the point that there is some new kind of approach to the whole damn thing. But this is a series that's based on very, very, very consumerist values deep down behind it all, and violence to maintain them. And the most terrible message of all is in there, that the main character, despite him going to his therapist and sort of, we're taken into a kind of world of, or rather, the whole cultural background, including what's out there in the media, in the commentariat, is telling us, well, this is creating a more desirable way of being mafia. Somebody who's thoughtful, who's got a conscience. So we see time and time again the bad acts are there as a possibility. The bad acts, people getting killed, tortured, their bodies smashed, deliberate pain inflicted. Yeah, those bad acts are there as a possibility. And then, is it Tony Soprano is like talking with his therapist, etc., etc. But then it doesn't deliberately loop back. Down the line, all of that talk is irrelevant because the bad acts still happen. Now, I don't think anybody actually has even realized that. It's like, it's not a very good message. Okay, sounds like I'm preaching a load of crap. That to me is cynicism. Saying that is great television is the worst in cynicism. And then I even 6 months ago, a year ago, having heard time and time again, and in the Radio 4's going on about it all the time now, BBC, Killing Eve. Now, I'd almost say ditto, but worse. I mean, it's obviously brilliantly made, brilliantly acted. It is the supreme act of, it's not really postmodern, but modernist. Anything goes. What's the assassin? She comes from some nowhere in the middle of nowhere and yet recreates herself in the capitals, the glorious capitals, the glamorous capitals of Europe and the rest of the world. No, again, it sensationalizes, glorifies in the worst of all way, because it turns it into an artifice. Terrible violence. Okay, that sounds like I'm a pathetic wimp, but now there's nothing wonderful. There's nothing genuinely heartwarming in there. There's nothing about how to really live this difficult and confusing modern existence of being human. Back to Mr. Bond. So I put on the Bond, and within 10 minutes, no, not within 10 minutes, sorry, halfway through, fuck it, Bond's got a kid. And then throughout the second half, it comes out that he'll do anything, even though he's not even sure. I think that was the storyline. Not even quite sure of the paternity line. Well, the bottom line is he dies at the end for his kid. Oh, I was crying. I was weeping. Christ. The makers of James Bond at last get it. Oh, we all enjoyed the previous iterations, but how magnificent is this? Now, as I was about to ramble on, the world, the last 5 or 10 years, everything's about sexuality, blah, blah, blah. Now, in my 20s, several friends of mine were absolutely categorically, actually earlier than that, very openly gay, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go on about that one, but I'm aware every time you turn on Radio 4 or listen to or any alternative media, people talking about the culture wars. I'm sorry, this is just They can have their culture wars. One of them, no, the most admired public figure in the sort of progressive, but not rights-focused conversation in my 20s was Tom Robinson. So what? I've never had a gay bone in my life, but so what if he did a song, Sing If You're Glad to Be Gay? He also did several other wonderful songs. I wouldn't call him an activist. He was a great artist. We didn't even really think of him as gay. But anyway, he goes on 5 or 10 years later to have some kids. You know, the human preference for sexual partnership can be fluid, blah, 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 blah. But having kids in there matters. That's the only way to... It's the best vaccination. And of course, nowadays it's been completely dealt with. That can be 2 gay people of either gender adopting a kid. That is totally and utterly blah, blah, blah. Right. I'm not doing very well here. But I shall still publish it. Nothing wrong with me. When I sleep under my hill here, not very often, but I wake up totally and utterly. My mind is completely cleared, and it's like, what really? Now, I did something I don't like doing, really, which is last night I had a browse of Kickstarter. From time to time, I've thought about how do films get made, what really is behind them. And the reason I want a few people to work with me on this is because I have dealt with the media before, and there's 2 things about the media. Now, the first thing is you actually have to ignore negative things that they put in. There's only one thing that I find hurtful. Hurtful's the wrong word. It just... I mean, they say all publicity is good publicity. But there's one thing in my rearguard action in 2009. It began 2008, 2009. Was it Matthew Bell? Yeah, Matthew Bell of The Independent did a piece. It was interesting how that piece came about. But he put in that piece that I'm an intense person. My whole life. The only reason I achieved this groundbreaking, or whatever you want to call it, change or adjustment to the culture, considerable adjustment to the culture in 2004, 5, 6. It's because I'm not an intense person. Intense people don't take themselves off and sleep next to their favourite hill where nothing happens. In fact, in that period, I would take myself off, sometimes with my daughter, to places where, even though this was just before smartphones came along, but where there was no mobile phone signal, and I would just pitch up. There was one, the best place was a place called Llyn Llywelyn, which is near Llanidloes, which I can say better because I ain't got a... That's a fantastic lake with a little road around it, huge lake. I think it's a reservoir, technically. Up in the Welsh Hills, there is absolutely no mobile phone signal. You get about 4, well, at that time, you get about 4 cars a day there. Oh, we would just park up our camper van. Now, I would be dealing with my kid, but I'd wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, do my hour to get myself prepared. It's astonishing how, I mean, I dropped something down there this morning and had to spend 20 minutes looking for it. And I believe in full disclosure. I then spent 20 minutes looking in the back of that for my glasses, which were in my pocket all the time. Oh, there's always little aggros that come along. But then you get to a point where hopefully you haven't exhausted yourself by all your logistical organisation. And then for an hour or two, you can totally focus on writing up your thing, which for a couple of years was endless statements and representations about a non-case. But that's how I got my focus. Being in the middle of nowhere and getting that stuff done. If my kid was with me by 9 o'clock in the morning, so that by the time she woke up, you can hear the ferrets snoring in the back. By the time she woke up, I'd have my attention fully on her. Good for me. Now, that's not very Hollywood. Back to film. See, I'm not a cynic, but there's something for years I've seen that kind of, in a way, surprises me. Take the film Samson and Delilah. You see, I don't think a film, there are some films that are just different, that get there to that different level. Nomadland isn't one of them. And they should have an afterlife. Now that sounds a little bit strange. There should be. Going back to Kickstarter. Now, I'm the sort of person, I don't really like the idea of like, putting things, an appeal or whatever you want to call it, on something like Kickstarter. Now, I see there are thousands. And you put something on Kickstarter, of films that is, of film projects that have been, I think it's about 1,000 or 2,000 current invitations. They do speak of something that there needs to be a movement. Now, precisely. Now, I don't have grandiose thoughts, but I do think all the way. I think in terms of what really is the ultimate goal. Now, the ultimate goal, if you're going to make a film, is not about me. When you're in your 40s, 30s, yeah, it's about you. But when you're my age, it's not about you. You've got no interest. Yeah, I don't even like really my friends texting me. What's the point? I don't want strangers to communicate with me. The only person I want to communicate, and she held out for 4 years, is the woman, not that journalist, by the way, is the woman who I have an enjoyable correspondence with. I'm too old to do anything about it. But there should be a movement. And I think in terms of, okay, you got a film, let's just say it achieved something. There should be. Not websites about the name of the under camera operator and the tittle tattle and the gossip. No. What was this for? There should even be, if it makes money, a foundation that comes out of it to somehow inspire people to actually do something real, not to a formula, because that's the point. You have to, it's about. Right. In part 2, I started to waffle something, but now this might seem absolutely trite, but it's actually one of the key things. And it may not be possible to get it into this film, but I said you learn to scan. And it's a horrible way of putting it. It's not the right way of putting it, but you figure what's the correct, the just outcome of an interaction. That might be with a court, an official. It may be with another person with whom you've had a personal relationship with and it's gone wrong. But I'm the luckiest person in the world, because there've been several, let's just call them rearguard attacks on me. I've even had some very unpleasant people trying to shut me up, let's just put it that way. It didn't bother me in the slightest. But they even tried to intimate that I had mental health problems. And I've been held in 2012 and assessed. It's like, we're trying to get you committed, matey. And they had all the power. Guess what? They failed straight away. I had my in a police cell. Clinical psychologist and a layperson who's part of the system. Uh, nope, me. Even after 24 hours, I don't know. I've never had a dramatic life at all. I don't do melodrama. I don't do uh, reacting to anything. But in fact, that's why they didn't like it, that I didn't react to something that was done to me. It was just a random thing. But they saw it as their chance. Let's seek a bit of revenge on him. No, I've passed my mental health board. Thank you very much. I mean, I should have asked them for a certificate. Or would they tried everything to destroy me? Anyway, why did I get onto that? Yeah, right. So, just as this thing started, mid double O's, began digital communication. Now, it's not really part of this film, but I saw myself, I lived through it being a terrible form of communication if you're at odds with somebody. It's horrible. Every text that comes in, even if it's not, innocently, you feel it as an attack. And I learnt, this has got nothing to do with my ex short-lived wife or anything like that. There's nothing personal about that. I learnt it's much more actually dealing with courts and people like that, people in authority. Leave your texts, leave your letters even, until a point where you know what is the correct, right, sane, just, fair response. Because you know that nearly any letter or text, or email particularly, is a kind of attack. People generally, particularly then, they would use those forms of communication if they've got something, frankly, that's not going to solve a conflict. If they've got something that's going to solve a conflict, they'll phone you up. If not, they'll use these, frankly, cowardly forms of communication. So you leave them, you see them come in, particularly when you're busy, when you've got a deadline on, you've got to put in a court statement or something, leave them. And this might sound actually insane, but decide what the answer is before you've read it. And it may take several days. You may need to go away for the weekend into somewhere lovely. Now, you see, that's a technique that I learned that is so important. And it's not incidentally, because this is what I actually care. Well,